The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of Sunset Manor Nursing Home in Portland, Oregon, creating a melancholic symphony that matched Sarah Mitchell's weary heart. At 34, she had spent the last 8 years of her life caring for the elderly, finding purpose in their stories and comfort in their wisdom. Her gentle hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked on her patients during the evening shift, her scrubs wrinkled from a 14-hour day that had started before dawn. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison," Sarah whispered softly as she entered room 217, where 82-year-old William Harrison lay propped against his pillows, his once strong frame now fragile beneath the hospital blankets. His steel-gray eyes, though, clouded with age, still held a spark of intelligence that reminded her of someone she'd rather forget. "Sarah, my dear," William's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the warmth that had drawn her to him over the past 6 months. "You look tired. You work too hard for an old fool like me." She smiled, adjusting his blankets and checking. His the fourth drip. "You're not a fool, Mr. Harrison. You're one of the kindest men I've ever known." And she meant it. In all her years of nursing, she had rarely encountered someone so grateful for the smallest gestures of care. William never complained about the pain she knew he endured daily, never demanded special treatment, and always asked about her well-being before his own. "Tell me about your day," he requested, as he did every evening. Sarah had learned that Mr. Harrison had been a successful businessman in his younger years, though he rarely spoke of his family. The few times she'd asked about children or grandchildren, his eyes would grow distant, and he'd change the subject with a sadness that broke her heart. "Well," Sarah began, settling into the worn chair beside his bed, "Mrs. Chun in room 203 finally beat me at checkers today. She was so proud of herself. She made me promise to tell everyone." She watched William's face light up with genuine delight at the small victory of another resident. "And what about you, Sarah? When do you take time for yourself? When do you let someone care for you?" His question caught her off guard, as it always did. There was something about the way he looked at her, with such paternal concern, that made her want to share the burdens she typically kept locked away. Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to the simple silver locket around her neck, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. Inside was a photo of her daughter Emma, now 9 years old, and the only good thing that had come from the worst period of her life. "I don't need much, Mr. Harrison. Emma and we take care of each other." "Emma," he repeated softly, and Sarah noticed his eyes grow misty. "What a beautiful name. She must be very special." "She is," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "She's everything to me. Smart, funny, kind. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Says she wants to help people like her mama does." She paused, the weight of her financial struggles pressing down on her. "Sometimes I wonder if I can give her everything she deserves. The private school she's in now is stretching us thin, but she's so bright, Mr. Harrison. She deserves every opportunity." William reached out with a trembling hand and gently touched hers. "You're a remarkable mother, Sarah. I can see it in your eyes, the love you have for her. That's worth more than any amount of money." If only that were true, Sarah thought silently. If love could pay for Emma's education, her medical bills when she'd been sick with pneumonia last winter, or the rent on their small apartment in a less desirable part of town. But she simply squeezed his hand in return, drawing strength from his kindness. "Tell me about her father," William asked quietly, and Sarah felt her chest tighten. It was a question she dreaded, one that brought back memories of betrayal and heartbreak that still felt fresh after all these years. "There's not much to tell," she said, her voice barely audible. He left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility." She forced a bitter laugh. "Funny thing is, he had just gotten some big promotion. was talking about all the money he was going to make. But a baby? That was too much commitment for him. William's grip on her hand tightened, and she saw something flash across his face. Anger, perhaps, or recognition. "I'm sorry, dear. No woman should have to face that alone." "I wasn't completely alone," Sarah continued, needing suddenly to share this burden she'd carried for so long. "His father reached out to me once, early in my pregnancy. Called me, said he'd heard about the situation and wanted to help. But then," she shrugged, the old pain surfacing, "I never heard from him again. I suppose his son convinced him I wasn't worth the trouble." She didn't see the way William's face went pale, or how his hands began to shake, not from age or illness, but from a dawning realization that was breaking his heart into pieces. She was too lost in her own memories, the echo of a young man's. Cruel words. "She's just some nurse, Dad. She knew what she was getting into. We don't owe her anything." "Sometimes I lie awake at night," Sarah continued, "wondering what I did wrong. Was I not good enough? Was our love just a lie to him? Emma asks about her father sometimes, and I don't know what to tell her. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that her father chose money and success over her?" "Sarah," William whispered, his voice breaking. "Look at me, dear." She raised her eyes to meet his, surprised by the intensity she found there. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to tell her something important, something that might change. Everything? But then he simply said, "You did nothing wrong." Nothing at all. Some people make choices they spend the rest of their lives regretting. The moment was interrupted by Sarah's phone, buzzing with a text from Emma's school. Late payment notice for tuition. Again, Sarah quickly silenced the phone, but not before William noticed the worry that crossed her face. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Just the usual," she replied with forced lightness. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." But her heart was heavy with the knowledge that Emma might have to leave the school that was nurturing her brilliant mind, might have to settle for less, because Sarah couldn't provide more. As she prepared to leave for the night, William called out softly, "Sarah, thank you for everything. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that, Mr. Harrison?" "Hope," he replied simply, "and the chance to see what real goodness looks like." Sarah left that night with tears in her eyes, unaware that the man she'd been caring for with such devotion was the father of the man who had shattered her heart and abandoned their child. She had no idea that William Harrison was not just wealthy. He was the patriarch of Harrison Industries, a business empire worth hundreds of millions. Most importantly, she couldn't have imagined that he had been searching for her for 9 long years, carrying the guilt of his son's actions and his own failure to protect her when she needed it most. In room 217, William Harrison lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart breaking with the knowledge of what his son Marcus had done. The successful, cold businessman he had raised had not only abandoned the most loving, selfless woman William had ever met, but had also denied him the chance to know his granddaughter, a child who wanted to be a doctor, who had her grandmother's kind heart that William remembered so well from his late wife. Tomorrow, he decided, everything would change. But tonight, he wept for the lost years, the missed opportunities, and the incredible woman who had been caring for him with love. Wow. He harbored the secret that connected their broken hearts. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with frost covering the windows of Sunset Manor like delicate lace curtains that filtered the weak autumn sunlight. Sarah arrived early, as always, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for Mr. Harrison, who she discovered enjoyed the simple pleasure of real coffee rather than the institutional brew served at breakfast. "Good morning, sunshine," she called softly as she entered his room, but stopped short when she saw him. William was sitting up in bed, fully dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks instead of his usual hospital gown. His thin hair was combed neatly, and there was something different about his demeanor, a sense of purpose she hadn't seen before. "Mr. Harrison? Are you feeling all right? You look—" She paused, searching for the word. "Different today." "I feel different today, Sarah," he replied, accepting the coffee with hands that seemed steadier than usual. "I've been thinking all night about our conversation, about you, about Emma, about the choices we make and the consequences we live with." Sarah pulled up her chair, studying his face with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years reading the subtle signs of her patient's conditions. "Is your pain worse today? You seem agitated." "Not physical pain, dear," William said quietly. "The kind that goes much deeper. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." There was something in his tone that made her stomach clench with apprehension. "Of course, Mr. Harrison, you can ask me anything." "The man who left you, Emma's father... What was his name?" Sarah's hand automatically went to her locket, a protective gesture she wasn't even aware of. "Why do you want to know?" "Mr. Harrison, you're scaring me a little." "Please," he said urgently, reaching for her hand. "I need to know. It's important. More important than you can imagine." She saw something desperate in his eyes, a pain that seemed to echo her own. Against her better judgment, she whispered, Marcus Harrison." She paused, then added with bitter irony, "Funny coincidence. Isn't it? Same last name as you." William's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, the ceramic shattering on the floor as the hot liquid spread across the linoleum. But he barely noticed, because his worst fears had just been confirmed. The woman who had been tenderly caring for him, who had shown him more genuine love in 6 months than he'd received in years, was the mother of his grandchild, the woman his son had cruelly abandoned. "Oh, God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Oh, sweet God, what have we done? Mr. Harrison?" Sarah was immediately in nurse mode, checking his pulse, his color, his breathing. "Should I call the doctor? Are you having chest pains?" But William gently took her hands in his, stilling her frantic ministrations. "Sarah, sit down. Please, I have something to tell you, and it's going to change everything." She obeyed, though every instinct told her to run. There was something in his eyes now that terrified her. Not danger, but a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. "Marcus Harrison is my son," William said simply, and watched as the color drained from Sarah's face. That's not possible," she stuttered, pulling her hands away from his. "You're just... This is just some terrible coincidence. Your son couldn't be... He wouldn't." "He would, and he did," William replied, his voice heavy with shame. "Sarah, I've been looking for you for 9 years." She stood up abruptly, backing away from the bed as if he'd struck her. No, this isn't happening. You're confused, Mr. Harrison. The medication sometimes causes confusion." "I'm not confused, dear one," he said gently. "I'm heartbroken, and I'm ashamed, but I'm not confused. You said his father called you once during your pregnancy, wanted to help. That was me, Sarah. I called you because Marcus told me what had happened, told me he'd gotten a girl pregnant, and walked away. He said you were just some nurse who was trying to trap him, that you knew what you were getting into." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank back into the chair, her face pale as winter snow. "You're him. You're the man who called me, and then never called back. Marcus convinced me you were lying about the baby being his. Said you were just after money," William continued, each word feeling like glass in his throat. "He showed me pictures of other men you'd supposedly been with, told me stories about. Your character that I now know were complete fabrications. I was weak, Sarah. I was weak, and I was selfish. And I believed my son because it was easier than facing the truth. about who he really was. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. Years of hurt and abandonment flooding back with crushing force. So you just forgot about me? About your grandchild? I tried to, William admitted, his own eyes filling with tears. But I could never shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The guilt ate at me for years. When my health started failing, when I knew I might not have much time left, I hired investigators to find you, to find out if there really was a child. And Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Emma Grace Mitchell, born March 15th, 9 months and 2 weeks after Marcus ended your relationship. Brilliant student, honor roll, wants to be a doctor. Looks just like her grandmother, my wife, did at that age. William's voice broke. Completely. I've been watching from a distance for 2 years, Sarah. I've seen you struggle to pay her school fees. Seen you work double shifts to keep her in that school where she's thriving. I've watched you give everything you have to that beautiful child while my son builds his fortune and pretends she doesn't exist. Sarah was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Why didn't you help us? If you knew we were struggling, if you knew Emma was your granddaughter, why didn't you do something? Because I'm a coward, William replied simply. Because I was terrified you'd hate me for abandoning you, for believing Marcus's lies. Because I was dying, and I thought it would be selfish to disrupt your lives just to ease my own conscience. But then you ended up here, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn through her pain. In my care. Fate, perhaps. Or God's way. Of giving me one last chance to try to make things right. William struggled to sit up straighter. Sarah, I don't have much time left. The doctors have given me maybe 6 months, probably less. But I have money, more money than I could spend. In 10 lifetimes. Emma is my granddaughter, my only grandchild. And you're the daughter I always wished I'd had. Mr. Harrison, I can't. This is too much ... double quotes. I know it is, dear one. I know this changes everything between us. You have every right to hate me, to walk out of this room and never come back. But please, before you decide anything, let me tell you what I want to do, what I need to do before I leave this world. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself enough to think clearly. Everything she thought, she knew about her life, about the man who had abandoned her, about the elderly patient she'd grown to love, had been shattered in the span of minutes. Emma's education, William continued urgently. Her college fund, graduate school if she wants to be a doctor. Your mortgage, your debts, your financial security. I want to give you everything that should have been yours 9 years ago. Everything my son stole from you when he walked away. I don't want your money, Sarah said suddenly, surprising them both with the strength in her voice. I've gotten by without it this long. Emma and I, we don't need charity. It's not charity, Sarah. It's justice. It's what's right. William leaned forward intently. But more than that, I want something money can't buy. I want to know my granddaughter. I want to spend whatever time I have left being the grandfather I should have been from the beginning. Sarah closed her eyes, her mind reeling. The man she had hated for years wasn't who she thought he was. The father of her child's father was here, in this room, dying and asking for forgiveness. And Emma, sweet Emma, who had never known any grandparents, had one who loved her and wanted to be part of her life. Does Marcus know you found us? She asked finally. William's face hardened. Marcus doesn't know anything. And if I have my way, he never will. He made his choice 10 years ago, Sarah. He chose his money and his career and his selfish life over you and Emma. He doesn't get to change his mind now just because it's convenient. Sarah looked at this frail, elderly man who held so many of her family's secrets, who represented both the source of her greatest pain and potentially her greatest blessing. "I need time to think about this, Mr. Harrison. It's overwhelming." "Of course, dear one. Take all the time you need." He paused, then added softly, "But Sarah, don't take too much time. I don't have much left to give, but what I have belongs to you and Emma. Let me spend my final months being the family you deserved. From the beginning." As Sarah left room 217 that morning, her head spinning with revelations that had turned her world upside down, she had no idea that Marcus Harrison was at that very moment in his penthouse office across town, reviewing quarterly reports that showed his wealth had reached new heights. He had no idea his father was dying, no idea his daughter was struggling to pay for school, and no idea that the woman he'd abandoned had been caring for the man who'd raised him. But that was about to change, because William Harrison had lived with his regrets long enough, and he was about to take steps that would force his son to face the consequences of his choices. Whether Marcus was ready for them or not, the storm that had been building for 10 years was finally about to break. Emma Mitchell sat at the small kitchen table in their modest apartment, her math homework spread before her, pencil tapping against her lips as she worked through a particularly challenging problem. At 9 years old, she had inherited her mother's compassionate heart and her father's sharp intellect, though she knew nothing of the latter inheritance. "Mom?" she called as Sarah walked through the door, noting immediately that something was different about her mother's usual calm demeanor. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders tense with a burden Emma had never seen her carry before. "Yes, sweetheart?" Sarah forced a smile, hanging up her coat and trying to push the morning's revelation from her mind. But how could she? The man she'd been caring for, the man she'd grown to love like a father, was actually connected to the greatest heartbreak of her life. "Are you okay? You look like you've been crying." Sarah's heart clenched. Emma was so perceptive, so attuned to others' emotions. It was both a gift and a burden for such a young child. "I'm fine, maybe. Just a difficult day at work. One of my patients ... got some hard news." Emma abandoned her homework and came to wrap her thin arms around her mother's waist. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know how much you care about the people there." If only you knew, Sarah thought, holding her daughter close and breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Emma, what would you say if I told you that ... that we might have more family than we thought?" Emma pulled back to look at her mother's face, her dark eyes, so much like Marcus's, though Sarah tried not to think about that, bright with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Sarah led her daughter to the couch, trying to find the right words. How do you explain to a child that the grandfather she's never known exists, is dying, and has been looking for her? How do you tell her that her father, who she's been told simply wasn't ready to be a daddy, is actually a wealthy man who chose money over her? "You know how you've always asked about grandparents?" Sarah began carefully. "About your dad's family?" Emma nodded eagerly. She'd been fascinated by her friend Jessica's stories about grandparents who sent birthday presents and took her to baseball games and baked cookies for school events. "Well, it turns out that your daddy's father, your grandfather, he's actually been looking for us." "Really?" Emma's eyes grew wide. "Where has he been? Why didn't he find us before?" "It's complicated, sweetheart. There were misunderstandings, and people told lies, and, well, sometimes adults make mistakes. Big ones." Sarah tucked a strand of Emma's dark hair behind her ear. "He's sick now, Emma, very sick. And he wants to meet you, if you'd like to meet him." "What's he like?" Emma asked, and Sarah realized with a start that she could answer that question, honestly and positively. "He's kind," she said, her voice growing warm despite everything. "He's gentle and funny, and he listens when you talk to him. He asks about your day and cares about your answer. He's He's a lot like you, actually. He thinks about other people's feelings. Where is he? At the nursing home where I work. That's how we found each other. I've been taking care of him without knowing who he was." Sarah paused, then made a decision. "Would you like to meet him tomorrow after school?" Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Yes, oh yes, Mom. I've always wanted a grandfather." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed clutching a picture book about families and grandparents that she'd pulled from her bookshelf, Sarah found herself staring at her phone. William had given her his personal number, asked her to call when. She'd made her decision. She dialed, her heart pounding. "Sarah?" His voice was weak but alert. "She wants to meet you," Sarah said without preamble. "Tomorrow after school. But Mr. Harrison, William, there are conditions. Anything. Name them." "We tell Emma the truth, but we tell it gently. She doesn't need to know about the money, not yet. She doesn't need to know that that her father, actively chose to abandon her. Let her believe what she's always believed, that he just wasn't ready to be a parent." "Agreed. What else?" "If you want to be part of her life, it's not about guilt or making amends to me. It's about her. She comes first in everything. Her needs, her feelings, her well-being. Of course, Sarah. Thank you. I don't deserve this chance, but I'm grateful for it. And William? She's going to love you. She's going to get attached. When your time comes, it's going to break her heart." There was silence on the other end of the line for a long moment. "Then I'll have to make sure that the time we have is so full of love that it sustains her long after I'm gone." Meanwhile, across town in his glass-walled penthouse office, Marcus Harrison was working late again, as had become his habit. At 36, he was everything he'd always dreamed of becoming: successful, wealthy, powerful. Harrison Industries had tripled in size under his leadership, and he lived the life he'd always envisioned: expensive cars, exclusive clubs, a penthouse apartment that had been featured in architectural magazines. He was reviewing acquisition proposals when his assistant knocked on his office door. "Mr. Harrison? I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been a call about your father." Marcus looked up, irritated at the interruption. He and his father had been estranged for several years, ever since William had started questioning Marcus's business practices and personal choices. "What kind of call?" "From Sunset Manor Nursing Home. Apparently, your father has been a resident there for 6 months. They said he's quite ill, sir." The pen slipped from Marcus's fingers. "That's impossible. My father lives in the family estate. He has round-the-clock care. Sir, they have him listed as William Harrison, and they confirmed his social security number and next of kin information. They said he's been asking for you." Marcus stared out at the city lights, his mind racing. His father, the man who had built Harrison Industries from nothing, was in a nursing home? How had he not known? When was the last time he'd actually spoken to William? The truth hit him like a physical blow. It had been over 2 years. 2 years since their last argument about Marcus's responsibilities and the importance of family. He'd been so busy building his empire, so focused on proving he could exceed even his father's success, that he'd completely lost touch with the man who'd given him everything. "Get me the address," he said quietly, "and cancel my appointments for tomorrow morning." As the elevator descended from the 40th floor to the parking garage, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine fear. Not about a business deal or a market downturn, but about losing someone who mattered. His father had always been larger than life, a force of nature who'd seemed invincible. The idea that William was somewhere dying, alone, was almost incomprehensible. Drove through the Portland night, his Lamborghini's engine roaring through empty streets, trying to outrun the guilt that was chasing him. He thought about the last conversation he'd had with his father, about family and legacy and the things that really mattered. William had tried to tell him something about a woman, about a child, about responsibilities he needed to face. Marcus had walked out, dismissing his father's words as the ramblings of an old man who didn't understand the modern world. Now, racing toward Sunset Manor, Marcus realized that his father had been trying to save him from becoming exactly what he'd become: successful, wealthy, and completely alone. He had no idea that tomorrow would bring him face to face with the consequences of his choices. He had no idea that the child his father had tried to make him acknowledge was about to meet her grandfather for the first time. And he certainly had no idea that the woman he'd convinced himself was just a gold digger trying to trap him had spent nearly a decade caring for others, while struggling to provide for the daughter he'd denied. The reckoning Marcus Harrison had been avoiding for 10 years was finally at hand. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of room 217 as Sarah held Emma's hand, both of them standing just outside the door. Her daughter was wearing her best dress, the navy blue one with small white flowers that Sarah had bought for last year's school photos, and had insisted on braiding her hair herself to look proper for meeting Grandpa. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, though she was the one whose hands were trembling. "A little," Emma admitted, then looked up at her mother with wise eyes that seemed far too mature for a 9-year-old, but mostly excited. "Will he like me, Mom?" Sarah's heart broke a little at the question. "Oh, baby, he's going to love you. How could he not?" They knocked softly and entered to find William sitting in his wheelchair by the window, wearing a button-down shirt and tie despite being in a nursing home. He'd clearly made an effort to look his best for this momentous occasion. When he saw Emma, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, not just pretty, but radiant with the kind of inner light that reminded him so much of his late wife. Her dark hair caught the sunlight, and when she smiled shyly at him, he saw echoes of Marcus at that age, before life had hardened his son's heart. "Emma," he whispered, extending a trembling hand toward her. "My dear, sweet Emma." "Hello, Grandpa," she said simply, and those 2 words contained enough love to heal years of heartbreak. Sarah watched as her daughter approached William without hesitation, accepting his hug with the natural warmth she'd always shown to others. "Mom told me you've been looking for us," Emma said, settling into the chair beside his wheelchair. "I'm glad you found us." For the next hour, Sarah watched magic happen. William asked Emma about school, her friends, her dreams, listening to every word as if it were precious. Emma told him about her science project on butterflies, her best friend Madison, and her dream of becoming a doctor like the ones who help sick people get better. "That's a wonderful dream," William said, his voice thick with pride. "Your mother tells me you're very smart." "I try to be," Emma replied seriously. "Mom works really hard to send me to a good school, so I want to make her proud." William's eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head, and she saw the pain there. Pain at all the missed moments, all the lost opportunities, all the ways his son had failed this remarkable child. "Emma," William said carefully, "would you like to see some pictures of your grandmother? My wife, your daddy's mother, who died before you were born." Emma's eyes lit up as William pulled out an old photo album Sarah had never seen before. The pictures showed a beautiful woman with Emma's same dark hair and bright smile, holding a young boy who looked startlingly like Emma around the eyes and mouth. "That's your daddy when he was about your age," William explained, pointing to a photo of Marcus at maybe 10 years old, grinning as he held up a baseball trophy. "He looks happy there," Emma observed with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "He was," William replied sadly, "very happy. Things changed as he got older." They were so absorbed in the photo album that none of them heard the soft knock on the door. They didn't notice the tall figure standing in the doorway, frozen in shock as he took in the scene before him. Marcus Harrison had arrived at Sunset Manor that afternoon with a mixture of guilt and duty, expecting to find his father alone and possibly dying. What he found instead was a tableau that stopped his heart. His father, looking more alive than Marcus had seen him in years, showing photographs to a young girl who looked startlingly familiar, and a woman whose profile made his chest tighten with half-forgotten memories. "Dad," he said softly, stepping into the room. 3 heads turned toward him, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. The woman was Sarah, older, more mature, but unmistakably the Sarah Mitchell he'd loved and abandoned 10 years ago. And the child— "Oh my God," he whispered, staring at Emma's face, seeing his own features reflected there, seeing his mother's smile and his father's intelligent eyes. Sarah shot to her feet, instinctively moving to place herself between Marcus and Alice. "Emma, what are you doing here?" They called me." Sighed. "Dad was sick." Marcus couldn't take his eyes off Emma, who was looking between the adults with growing confusion and concern. "Sarah, is she—" "Don't." Sarah's voice was sharp with protective fury. "Don't you dare." But Emma, with a child's uncanny ability to sense important truths, was studying Marcus's face with growing recognition. "You look like the boy in the pictures," she said quietly. "You look like Grandpa's son." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his daughter, while William watched his son with a mixture of hope and despair. Sarah stood frozen, 10 years of carefully constructed protection crumbling around her. "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "why don't you go get some juice from the vending machine down the hall? Here's some quarters." "But Mom—" "Please, sweetheart. Give the grown-ups a few minutes to talk." Emma reluctantly left, but not before looking back at Marcus with curious eyes that held no judgment, no anger, only the innocent interest of a child meeting someone new. When the door closed behind her, the 3 adults stood in silence for a long moment. 10 years, Marcus finally said, his voice barely audible. "She's 10 years old." 9, Sarah corrected coldly. "She turned 9 in March. Not that you would know." Marcus sank into a chair as if his legs had given out. "Dad, how long have you known that Sarah was here?" 6 months. "That Emma existed?" 2 years. William's voice was steady, but filled with disappointment. 2 years I've been trying to find a way to tell you, to make you face what you'd done. You knew I had a daughter, and you didn't tell me? You knew you had a daughter, and you walked away, William replied sharply. "Don't talk to me about not telling you things, son." Sarah watched this exchange with growing anger. "This isn't about you, Marcus, either of you. This is about Emma. She's 9 years old. She's never known her father, and she doesn't need to be caught in the middle of your family drama." "Sarah," Marcus stood up, taking a step toward her. "I had no idea. When I left, I thought— I was told that maybe ... You were told? By whom?" Marcus looked at his father, confusion clear on his face. "Dad said." There were questions about whether the baby was really mine. "I never said that." William's voice was quiet but firm. "You said that, Marcus. You convinced yourself it was true because it was easier than taking responsibility." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had convinced himself that Sarah was lying about the pregnancy, that she was trying to trap him, that the baby might not be his. But looking at Emma, seeing his own features reflected in her face, he realized he'd been lying to himself all along. "I've made a terrible mistake," he whispered. "Yes, you have," Sarah said simply. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Marcus could answer, Emma reappeared in the doorway, clutching a juice box and looking between the 3 adults with concern. "Is everyone okay? You all look sad?" Marcus knelt down, so he was at Emma's eye level, his heart breaking as he really looked at his daughter for the first time. She was beautiful, intelligent, kind, everything he should have been there to. Nurture and protect. "Emma," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "My name is Marcus. I'm your daddy." Emma's eyes widened, and she looked quickly at her mother, then back at Marcus. "You're my daddy? The one who wasn't ready?" The innocence of the question shattered something inside Marcus. "Yes, sweetheart. And I made the biggest mistake of my life when I wasn't ready to be your father. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Emma studied his face with the serious consideration only children can manage. "Mom says people make mistakes sometimes. Big ones. The biggest," Marcus confirmed, tears streaming down his face now. Do you think you might want to get to know me? I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to try to be the daddy you deserve." Emma looked at her mother, seeking permission and guidance. Sarah's own eyes were wet with tears as she nodded slightly. Whatever anger she felt toward Marcus, she couldn't deny her daughter the chance to know her father if that's what Emma wanted. "I think I'd like that," Emma said simply, then surprised everyone by stepping forward and giving Marcus a tentative hug. "But you can't leave again, okay? Because that would make Mom cry, and I don't like it when she's sad." Marcus held his daughter. For the first time, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her small arms around his neck, and understanding finally what his father had tried to tell him years ago, that this was what mattered. Not money, not success, not building an empire. This small person, this perfect child who was willing to forgive him despite his failures, was worth more than everything he'd built. "I promise," he whispered into her hair. "I promise I'll never leave you again." Over Emma's head, his eyes met Sarah's, and he saw the caution there, the protective skepticism of a mother who had been let down before. He had a lot of work to do to earn her trust, to prove that this wasn't just guilt or a momentary awakening that would fade when the novelty wore off. "Sarah," he said, as Emma pulled back to return to her grandfather's side, chattering excitedly about having both a grandpa and a daddy now. "Can we talk? Privately?" They stepped out into the hallway, leaving William and Emma looking through more photo albums, the old man's face glowing with joy as he shared family stories with his granddaughter. 10 years, Marcus," Sarah said without preamble. 10 years I've struggled to give her everything she needs. 10 years I've worked double shifts and gone without so she could have opportunities. You don't get to just walk back into her life because it's convenient for you now." "You're right," Marcus said immediately. "You're absolutely right. I don't deserve anything from either of you. But Sarah, I want to make this right. I want to be the father she deserves, and I want to take care of both of you the way I should have from the beginning." "We don't need your money, Marcus." "Maybe not," he replied, "but Emma needs her college fund. She needs the security of knowing that her dreams of becoming a doctor aren't limited by finances. And you, God, Sarah, you shouldn't have to work yourself to exhaustion to give our daughter a good life." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching through the window as Emma showed William a drawing she'd pulled from her backpack, a crayon picture of a family that included a mother, a little girl, and now, apparently, a grandfather. "What changed?" she asked finally. "What made you suddenly want to be a father after all these years?" Marcus was quiet, considering the question seriously. "I think seeing Dad in there, dying, realizing how much time I'd wasted. Seeing Emma and understanding what I'd given up. But mostly seeing you." He paused, his voice growing softer. "Seeing the woman you became, the mother you are, the way you've loved and protected and sacrificed for our daughter. I realized that I didn't just abandon Emma 10 years ago. I abandoned the best thing that ever happened to me. Marcus, ... I'm not asking you to forgive me, Sarah. I'm not asking you to take me back or pretend the last 10 years didn't happen. I'm asking for the chance to be Emma's father and to support both of you the way I should have from the beginning. Before Sarah could respond, they heard Emma's laughter from inside the room, bright and joyful, as William told her a story about her grandmother. The sound decided things for Sarah more than any argument Marcus could have made. Okay, she said, quietly, but this is about Emma, not us. You want to be her father? Then be her father. Show up for school plays and soccer games and homework help. Be there when she's sick, when she's scared, when she needs someone to listen. Don't just write checks and think that makes you a parent. I will, Marcus promised. I want to be everything I should have been from the beginning. They returned to room 217 to find Emma curled up in William's lap, both of them looking at a photo of Marcus's mother holding a baby. Marcus himself, decades ago. Grandpa says Grandma would have loved me, Emma announced happily. And he says you used to catch fireflies in jars when you were little, Daddy. The word Daddy from Emma's lips hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had never imagined how much. He would want to hear it, how much he'd been missing all these years. I did, he confirmed, sitting down near them. Maybe this summer we can catch fireflies together. Really? And Mom can come too? Marcus looked at Sarah, hope and uncertainty in his eyes. If your mom wants to. We'll see, Sarah said diplomatically, but Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, as the afternoon wore on. An unusual family began to form in room 217. William shared stories of Marcus's childhood, painting a picture of the boy he'd been before ambition hardened his heart. Marcus listened to Emma talk about school and friends and dreams, marveling at her intelligence and kindness. Sarah watched it all with cautious hope, seeing her daughter's face light up in ways she'd never seen before. When visiting hours ended, Emma was reluctant to leave. She hugged William goodbye, making him promise he'd be there tomorrow when she came back. She hugged Marcus too, a little shyly, but with genuine warmth. Daddy? She said as they prepared to leave. Are you going to stay with Grandpa tonight? So he won't be lonely? Marcus looked at his father, seeing the hope in the old man's eyes. Would you like that, Dad? More than anything in the world, William replied as Sarah and Emma walked to their car, Emma chattering excitedly about her grandfather and her daddy and all the stories she'd heard. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that her daughter might have the family she'd always deserved. Behind them, in room 217, Marcus sat beside his father's bed, both men contemplating the strange turns life can take. I'm dying, son, William said quietly. The doctors give me maybe 3 months, probably less. Dad, I'm so sorry. If I'd known. You would have known if you'd bothered to call, William replied, but there was no anger in it anymore. Only sadness. But that's in the past now. What matters is what happens next. I'm going to be the father Emma deserves, Marcus promised. And I'm going to take care of Sarah. I'm going to make sure they never want for anything. That's good, son. But remember, they don't just need your money. They need your time, your attention, your love. Emma needs a father who shows up, not just one who pays the bills. I know, Dad. I understand that now. William nodded, then reached for his son's hand. There's something else, Marcus. Something I need you to promise me. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let guilt and regret consume you the way they did me. I spent years carrying the weight of the mistakes I made, the ways I failed you and Sarah and Emma. Learn from my mistakes, but don't repeat them. Live your life with love, son. Live it with purpose. Marcus squeezed his father's hand, understanding finally what the old man had been trying to teach him all along. "I will, Dad. I promise." Outside, in the parking lot, Sarah buckled Emma into her car seat, her mind racing with everything that had changed in a single afternoon. Her daughter had a father now, a grandfather who adored her, and possibly a future filled with opportunities Sarah had never been able to provide alone. But as she drove through the Portland evening, she also felt a profound sense of loss. The life she and Emma had built together, just the two of them against the world, was about to change forever. She was grateful for Emma's sake, but terrified of what it might mean for both of them. "Mom?" Emma's sleepy voice came from the back seat. "Are you happy about today?" Sarah looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror, seeing the contentment and joy in her little face. Whatever fears she had, whatever changes lay ahead, Emma was happy. That's what mattered most. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, and realized she meant it. "I think today was exactly what we needed." As they drove home through the neon-lit streets of Portland, none of them could have predicted how dramatically their lives would continue to change. William had perhaps 2 months left, not 3, and he intended to spend every moment of that time building memories with Emma and making sure his son understood what really mattered in life. Marcus would struggle with balancing his business empire, with his newfound family responsibilities, but he would learn, slowly and sometimes painfully, how to be the father and man he should have been all along. Sarah would discover that forgiveness is not a single act, but a daily choice, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. And Emma would grow up knowing she was loved by multiple generations, secure in the knowledge that she was wanted, valued, and supported in all her dreams. The story that began with abandonment and betrayal would end with redemption and love, proving that sometimes it's never too late to make things right, even when time is running short. In room 217 at Sunset Manor, an old man held his son's hand and whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, while across town, a mother tucked her daughter into bed and dared to hope that their story might finally have the happy ending she'd never allowed herself to dream of. Sometimes the most powerful healings come not from medicine or miracles, but from the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over pride, forgiveness over bitterness, and family over everything else that seems important, but ultimately isn't. The nurse who had cared for an elderly patient, unaware that his son was the millionaire who had abandoned her, had discovered that love has a way of coming full circle, even after 10 years of heartbreak. And in discovering that truth, she had given her daughter the greatest gift of all, a family that would never abandon her again.